Welcome to Roadcase, the podcast that explores the live music experience. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Josh Rosenberg, and I'll be taking you on a journey through in-depth interviews with performers and key people in the industry to explore the magic of live music, how it can be totally transformative for both fans and performers, and we'll look at how they take it all out on the road. It's going to be a great ride, so here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to Roadcase. I'm so psyched to be here. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Josh Rosenberg. We got a great episode today, and we got plenty more coming up, so stay tuned for that. As I do at the beginning of these episodes, I'd like to encourage you to get involved with the Roadcase community, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can send me an email at info@roadcasepod.com with your questions, concerns, and just to say hi. I love email. I mean, who doesn't love email these days, really? And you can also contact us on social media. Our handle is @RoadcasePod. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, so join up there and hit follow if you can. That would be cool. We got a YouTube channel, Roadcase Podcast. Also, you can join the party over at Patreon. We got a Patreon site at patreon.com/roadcasepod where you can join Roadcase and support Roadcase, which allows us to continue to bring you these great episodes. You can also help us by rating this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening to this now on like iTunes or something, for example, you can pause it and rate it and review it and come back. That would be really a great way to support this podcast in a more economically manageable fashion. And if you are able to support this podcast and you'd like to jump over to Patreon, that would be great as well, and that would be much appreciated. Thanks so much for your support. Okay, so for this episode of Roadcase, I'm really excited to welcome John Vanderslice to the show. I know you'll really find this interview super interesting. John is both a studio artist and a producer who runs a production company called Tiny Telephone, and the studio that once used to be in the Mission District in San Francisco now is in Oakland, and John lives in Los Angeles. And although he's a Florida native, he's been in California for almost 20 years, and much of his work reflects his love for the California landscape and that lifestyle and vibe, which I find interesting because I myself is from LA and kind of have an appreciation for the same thing. But John's studio albums are amazing. He's recorded over 10 albums, a handful of EPs, and has worked with a number of different bands, namely Mountain Goats, Strand of Oak, Spoon, Death Cab for Cutie, Sleater-Kinney. He's also recorded a version of David Bowie's Diamond Dogs, which is an album that's near and dear to my heart, so I love him for that. But John is a self-proclaimed agent of chaos. He loves anything that's different. I mean, not anything that's different, but he loves unique performances in live settings or unique recordings in a studio environment. Much of his work is an experimental of nature, but he says he's also obsessed with live music, but is also critical of live music and the way that it can be loud and overpowering for all the sort of wrong reasons of placing so many people in one place at one time, or just being in a bar and having a lot of loud background noise. It's kind of the nature of how he looks at music and of being sound and an expression of what a band is capable of doing, and he posits that perhaps that's not the best representation of the music. So we talk about a number of different types of live performances, and we even talk a little bit about Phish. We talk about his favorite band, Radiohead, and we just talk about how even the most minimal type of live performances can be the most interesting for him. It's an interesting perspective on recording from John Vanderslice. I think that you'll really find it informative and interesting, and it does provide an interesting perspective on live performance from someone whose work is for the most part these days, confined to the studio, obviously for COVID reasons, but someone I believe whose real heart is in studio production, and he's built a career around that. I love his albums. He's got a EP coming out in April, and he's got a new LP coming out in August. That'll be like around a dozen different LPs that he's produced in his 20-odd something year career. I really enjoyed this conversation with John. He's an amazing conversationalist and very intelligent voice in articulating his arguments, and we have some lovely discussion about live music versus studio performance. So thanks for joining me for this special episode of Roadcase. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank John Vanderslice again for taking the time to be here on Roadcase, and here we go. All right, John. Hey, how's it going, man?
It's going
Thanks
great.
Thanks for joining me on Roadcase.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you still haven't told me where you're located. Are you in Oakland or are you in LA?
I live in I live in historic Filipino town in Los Angeles.
Nice. I grew up in LA, so I'm a hometown boy there.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Valley. I'm a Valley boy.
What city?
Sherman Oaks.
That's great. I love it, man. The Valley is great. P.T. Anderson, like that's some classic shit up in the Valley. I love it.
What's P.T. Anderson, by the way? What?
Oh, the filmmaker. He, Magnolia and stuff. He's.
Oh, yeah. Magnolia
he's obsessed.
Was,
yes. That's
Wes Anderson.
No, that's Pete. That Wes Anderson is the guy who makes everything symmetrical and look like some kind of French fairy tale. B.T. Anderson is Boogie Nights, Hard Eight, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, The Master.
Okay. All right. My bad. But yeah, I remember Magnolia was all up in the Valley. Yeah, when I watched that, I'm like, oh yeah. So is Boogie Nights, of course, because Boogie Nights was like the '70s
absolutely.
Porn stuff was out way out in the North Valley. Yeah. So you know LA pretty well.
And even I do. I just moved here a year and a half ago, but I've always visited here. I played shows here, and I love living here.
Oh, cool. I mean, it's clearly a departure from the Bay Area, but since you're not a total California native, you don't get into like the competitions between North and South.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Florida. To me, this first off, it's one-sided. No one cares about the Bay Area at all. Do you know what I mean? It's like San Francisco is like a tourist town that thinks it's like an art center. You know what I mean? So, and it's fine. It's it's beautiful and north. I don't know if that's such a popular of San Francisco.
Opinion, but
yeah, I mean, and listen, I lived there for 30 years, so I have a complicated and deep love of the Bay Area, but there is the kind of cultural overlay I could do without,
So if you're running your studio in Oakland, are you? I mean, obviously that was one of my questions, like what's going on with that this year, but also it's kind of, if you live in LA, that sort of begs the question, how are you running the studio in Oakland?
Well, that has to do with genius engineers that work in the studio who are just amazing. And really the primary engineers now are Bo Sorensen and Miriam Kudus. And they're very experienced. They know the studio inside and out. They take care of a lot of issues. They give me heads up on stuff. I do go up and down. So I love going up there. I mean, it's a blast for me.
Yeah.
And so it just has its own, I think because the studio, it's in its 24th year, I think that because it has this kind of momentum, and Oakland was way better built and better designed than the two rooms in San Francisco. So it just needs less upkeep. It's not as fussy. It just kind of runs itself in a weird way. I mean, it doesn't mean there aren't crazy problems. We had... Our air conditioning went out, and when you're we have a machine room with very, inefficient machines that create a lot of heat. So you have to run air conditioning 24 hours a day. Right. Our air conditioning went out, and it's probably going to be $5,000 or $6,000, and that happened yesterday. So stuff happens all the time. So yeah.
Oh man. Wow, I feel your pain on that one.
Yeah, it's real.
Well, and during this COVID period, I mean, have you had recording going on, or what's kind of been your routine with that, and what have you pivoting or not?
I mean, it's been fucked up. I mean, there's really no pivot you can do that doesn't make you look like an idiot. Like I remember when Abbey Road started selling coffee mugs, and I was like, man, if we ended up doing that, I'm out of here, man. Like, fuck this shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like just pick a road. But like, if you're gonna be like, selling knickknacks, then don't. I mean, we all have legacies to protect. So
hopefully you'll have 50 years to 60 years of experience at your shoulders, and people if people are buying your coffee mugs, I mean, that's a good thing, right? Sorta.
I guess, but I mean, it's like, I'm like a ridiculous purist, but I like when kind of like, I don't know, like Electrical Audio Albini Studio. He just like records records. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm a simple man. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that like these are, you should be. I always think that studios should be sold out every day, and they should really just stick to art making. That's I'm like old school in that way. But I think when I was saying pivoting, I kind of meant, have you changed the way that you're recording there because we're in the middle of a pandemic? Well, it's wild. We really, it's so bad for studios that there's actually nowhere to pivot to. It's amazing because
right. You just can't do what you can't do it.
We can't do anything. We haven't done remote recording. We haven't done. It's just like, we just close. Basically like if there's like shelter in place, we close. We closed like 2 or 3 separate times for months and months. So last year we got clobbered. I mean, it's a little bit better now, but the studio rate and the studio system is predicated on like being sold out. So it's been terrible for us.
Yeah.
I just got like bumped off unemployment. So it's like a rough moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just trying to ask a softer question than what the fuck are you doing right now?
Yeah, and there's no softer.
So what the fuck are you doing right now, John?
We're waiting for vaccines to kick in. You got 10% of Californians have their first shot. So all we can do is like hold out. Our rent in Oakland is relatively low because our landlord's amazing, and he's been giving us he's been charging us half rent since the beginning of COVID.
Right.
And
that's great.
I don't know how we would have survived otherwise. So, I mean, still, I cannot imagine the body count at the end of COVID when it comes to studios, venues. I mean, you're talking to everyone. You see what's happening. Bands,
yeah. I mean,
artists,
at least
they're getting.
The Save Our Stages Act was passed, so that's sort of beginning to trickle down, but still, and it gives a little bit of comfort to venue owners because they know they're going to be able to pay employees possibly some back wages, definitely be able to keep a roof over the head for the time being. I mean, that was much deserved and much needed financial assistance. I can't imagine if you're not. I mean, that's only Save Our Stages. That's not Save Our Studios, right? I mean, it's a little bit unfair, right?
Well, and we know all of the other infrastructure that's in there. Like there's like people who do lighting and sound, and I mean, there's so many people that are just not going to see any of that money, and like bartenders. And
I hope they do. I hope they do in some way. But
me too.
No, I'm hearing shows coming back in the fall, maybe some partial stuff in the summer. One promoter I was talking to was saying that why would bands do a partial? Why would they tour and just do partial capacity venues when they know there could be full capacity venues coming soon in the fall?
Yeah.
And So there's that aspect too of at some point there's going to be a business decision from a band standpoint, from a promoter standpoint, from a venue standpoint that says, why would we do partial? We'll just wait until we can do full because that's where the business model really works. So there's a lot going on. And
there's simply when vaccines, let's just say that like vaccines are available to everyone in July. So you're looking at like, August 1st, August 15th as the date where if anyone's immunocompromised, if anyone is not a Q wacko or an anti-vaxxer, that they can take the vaccine. At that point, you've got to allow like mass gatherings. At some point you have to open everything up, or it's like it's like it's just there's no counter argument to that.
There's going to be a point where we're just like, okay, we're all 40% vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, or if you are, just everyone's going to be wearing a mask. So it's just going to have to be just as safe as possible. And yeah, things will start to come back. It'll be a new normal for a while, and then it'll just be regular normal. Hopefully the regular normal will be sooner than later. But you did do some of your own recording in 2020. I mean, you have a new album and you got an EP, which are just amazing works of art. So tell me a little bit about what the process was for that.
Well, I'm constantly recording because I'm in a studio now. I have a studio in my backyard in LA, and that's part of the reason why I live where I live. But I don't think I would survive if I wasn't recording all the time. It's been like incredibly important to me, and I made a record last year called Dollar Hits, and then an EP called Eep, and I also finished in the fall another record that's going to come out in this August called Death Bug. Oh, cool! And then another EP that's going to come out in April that's pure electronic, and it's like it's in like an homage to David Berman, who was a lead singer of the Silver Jews and Purple Mountains, and that's just like a purely like it's a love letter to someone who was like very important to me. So I don't know first off, what else is there to do during COVID but like record? And it's very hard to record without like the tour cycle in effect. It actually feels like you're just operating in the dark, and also financially it's very difficult not to have like income from touring, at least sporadically, even one-offs and like shorter tours, because bands. It's really impossible to put together a recording budget without that.
Well, you mentioned it's hard to do when you know you're not going to be going out on tour. Did you mean that purely from a financial standpoint, or also from a creative standpoint, being in the studio recording stuff, knowing that you're not going to be touring it anytime soon, which is presumably what occurred with those?
Yeah, the creative standpoint, it's terrible actually to like the idea of like, so I finished this record in December. I just sent it to QRP, so they're like cutting the vinyl, which is great. I mean, there's certain things that are nice, like you do have like lead time, but like the idea that this record is just sitting there for 8 months before it comes out, to me it's just super uncreative. Do you know what I mean? Because it puts you in a holding pattern, and we don't even know. I mean, I don't know how much bands are like saying this or admitting this, but the idea of playing to a room filled with people in masks makes you want to hang yourself. It's like it's literally not why you started playing music. Do you know what I mean? It's like it is an incredibly difficult thing.
It's
as a
super alien notion. It looks alien too.
Yeah. And you are so keyed into the connection of there's so much emotion that happens with people's faces, and like screaming along, and like and being like verbally present, and so all that stuff. It is called. What I've seen with my friends in LA is that a lot of bands and a lot of like really creative, productive people have just simply stopped recording. It's wild. They almost can't connect the dots anymore with why they're doing it. And now all that stuff is going to like, and there's going to be like some kind of renaissance after this shit. There just has to be. But like, I think that there's many people that I know that have just basically stopped because they don't see like the real reason why they should be making art right now. And that's kind of sad, like.
Well, okay. Yeah, it's definitely sad that that's occurring. But then, you know what I think in the back of my head? I'm like, oh, that's so cool that people don't want to record because the specter of not being able to play it live, you're saying weighs on creative artists in that sense. It's almost like interesting, though. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it feels like you're in a vacuum, right? So like if you make records, it's a conversation with your audience. It's a life-saving conversation with your audience. And the idea that when you disconnect, bands started like doing like Insta Live shows and like kind of dipping into this streaming thing, and it's literally like, I personally like it, but like people fucking hate it. You know what I mean? Like I like it because I think that it's it's better than, it'd be like working out in prison. Like it's better than like not working out in prison. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you want to leave prison like not like fit? You know what I mean?
Have you been
like,
watching the Shawshank Redemption recently or something? Or?
No, but I it's funny because I think about that we're in a version of like prison. You know what I mean? It's like incredibly disconnected and it's unnatural and like so. I know from talking to bands that it's a real philosophical problem because they spent their entire life gaining an audience and creating trust and a kind of like a aesthetic dialogue with people, and it's completely severed.
Not completely, I would argue. But it's
not completely.
But a huge part of it, the actual real live part of it, the most important part of it has been severed.
The most important part of it.
But we were talking before about recording in a studio. What's the pivot on that? No. Okay, well, that's a little bit of a dead end. But the pivot on not being able to be there, you can still get in front of your audience. It's totally fucking different, and it could suck. It sucks for a lot of performers for sure. But there are others that are kind of making lemonades out of lemons and and semi, I hesitate to say thriving, but as much as you could in that type of environment are doing the best they can, So
I mean,
there is that.
It's wild because you know what's been soaked is indie rock. Rap, I don't see in rap. I don't really see the same nihilism. Like I see way more productivity in rap than I do in indie rock. But I mean, keep in mind that I'm in the center of a lot of like recording stuff in LA. My next door neighbor is a huge producer. It's a huge studio production place. So it's like all I have to do is go on my porch to see who's recording. Do you know what I mean? And it's like it could be Pharoah Sanders or it's like MGMT or Wise Blood and like so like and the house that I live in is John Congleton's old house. So I'm friends with a lot of people that are just like super in the center of this stuff. And like so I'm kind of basing this on conversations that I'm having with people that are like 50 levels above me as far as like what they're doing and what they're the kind of like their workload, and I think that part of it is that in indie rock the stakes and the money is so low that it doesn't take much to kind of fuck everything up, and that's just the truth,
Interesting. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I mean that like bands, and this is why the whole like 25% capacity thing is so funny to me. Bands can barely, and I mean bands that we've heard of, bands that are big, they can barely make money on tour. Barely. You know what I mean? It's like if you have a middle class living as an indie rock artist, you are fucking big. And it's hard to get to that point. So when you start to look at like doing a live kind of like paid streaming show once every 2 months, it's comical. And when you start getting pitched for shows at 25% capacity, playing outside to like these like weird pods of masked people, the numbers don't work. It's like there's no way you can run that math where it actually makes sense to leave your county. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe,
absolutely. I mean, there are bands that just do it to get in front of their fans and just to keep their name out there, and just because they like playing outside live on a stage, and it's something. But the business model doesn't make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense at all.
I mean, it makes sense as like a forward-thinking kind of loss leader for your enterprise, and just a way to keep playing. Because there is kind of the added value of just being in front of fans. But other than that, you're absolutely right. John, but you're known as an analog devotee and traditionalist in that sense. If I don't know if that's the right word. How does that sort of? So, what's your thinking on live performance? I mean, we're talking pre-COVID now, right? In the actual real world, let's say. Getting back to what used to be normal. How does what you do in the studio and your emphasis on analog recording translate to live performance? We touched on that a little bit, but that was more in a business sense. But what's kind of your view on live performance when you have traditionally been so much in the studio recording indoors in a studio with other bands or alone? Like, what has been your what's your philosophy on going out there and doing things live?
So I'm kind of a weird person in a way that I like have like obsessive tendencies and then I just drop them, So for years I made, I had never made a record on Pro Tools. Well, I've still never made a record on Pro Tools, but like I had never made a record digitally until last year when I moved to LA and I got this. I'm in this very small, it's a 2-car garage that's in the backyard of the place I live in LA, and it was John Congleton's personal studio for a long time. I rented the place through him. So it's kind of set up more as like a project studio. And my first thought was I'll bring a tape machine in here. And then one of my friends, Tabor, who plays in Cherry Glazer, he challenged me. He's like,
the drummer.
Tabor's great. Yeah, he's great.
He's awesome. Great guy. Yeah, I've met him several times on tour. Yeah, great guy.
Whoa, sick. How'd you meet him on tour?
No, just because I've seen him several times in Chicago, and
that's awesome.
I don't know, he and I just always end up connecting after the show or something, because he's always outside just chatting it up, and we've had some extended conversations afterwards. And I also was in Mexico City seeing the National last October, and lo and behold, they were also playing in another venue like the next night, so I connected with those guys up again. And so,
that's awesome.
When you see people again and again on the road, it's like you kind of connected. They're just great guys, and Clem's great, and I saw one of the pictures on your website was from her name's escaping, Sam, who's the bassist in Cherry Glazer. Also, I was wondering how I was wondering how you were connected with her, but anyway, she has been working at Tiny Telephone for 5 or 6 years. So like that's I didn't even know
so
that.
So my world is threaded deeply with all of these people. Like Tabor is one of my closest friends. I mean, I'm seeing him tonight because we're going to take drugs together. And I saw him yesterday.
It's on the Google counter.
And I saw him. It's on. Yeah, we're going to take a crystal MDMA. I can't wait. We take it like every 3 or 4 months.
All right. Well, tell him I said hi, man.
You have to have some joy during. Oh, I will definitely. I mean, I see him like probably 5 or 6 days a week. So
great. Well, give him my regards,
close.
And he's just such a fucking rocking drummer too. God damn.
He's the best. He's the best.
Yeah, just a great guy. That's just a great band. They're one of my favorites.
Yeah, they're incredible. So he really changed my life because before I moved to LA, we went out to Mexican food. And I remember we were sitting at this long kind of like group table, and we were sitting together, and I was with another engineer from Tiny Telephone, and Tabor was like, "Listen, when you move into that to the house in LA and you have that back studio, don't bring a tape deck. Just get Ableton and record digitally and really challenge yourself. Like, you need to be challenged, and you need to have all of these like beliefs about recording completely overturned so you can like start making different types of music." And it was like, honestly, it was interesting but also exhausting. I was like, fuck, man, I got to like get Ableton and like figure out how to do this and get better converters and all this stuff. So it took me a year, but I took him up on it, and I did not bring a tape deck with me. And I just ended up getting like the best version of like a very simple digital setup that I could. And this is based on like super good converters that they use in like classical music stuff. So they're like, that's probably one of the most expensive things in my studio. So I just started making electronic music because you start making different types of music depending on how you record and what format you're using. Mm-hmm. And so I just became like totally radicalized. I don't reject analog recording at all, but I did it for 20 years, and now I'm doing something different. And it is like, it's been really difficult for me to make digital stuff sound good, but now I've kind of like figured out a system, and I'm making stuff that I think sounds very, very good, and I'm pretty excited about it, And
I think it
really
sounds amazing.
Different, and it's totally different. And the new record, Death Bug is a complete hybrid analog digital recording. I mean, it's like definitely like Radiohead style where they're just going back and forth between formats. And it changes the content of what you're doing. And that, to me, has been really exciting. And Tabor has everything to do with that.
Wow. Well, that's really cool, man.
But I'm not answering your question is about live performance. So knowing that I've like completely switched to digital, I've always been kind of like trying to overturn the way that I make music. Mm-hmm. So my kind of like attitude towards live music is that I'm just simply covering the music that I've recorded. So I'm just like I'm like an outsider that's taking these songs, and I'm free to do anything that I want. Like I did right before COVID, I did a tour in Europe. Oh yeah, so I was opening up for Not a Surf in Europe, and I it was tough. I'm playing solo, which I often do because of money. Like I don't make enough money to ever have, more than like at least a limited series of shows ever have more than one person. It's just that, and I think that a lot of performers, if they're honest about the size of what they do, it's like they have to like really think about limiting how many people are on the payroll, because touring has to be sustainable. When I go on tour, if I'm leaving LA for 3 weeks or a month, I have to come back with money, or it just doesn't make any sense. So in Europe, I just brought a drum machine, and I brought a electric guitar and like a weird effects device thing, and then vocal effects. And I just did very, very abstract versions of my songs, and I took audience questions every night, like
that's
different
fucking
questions.
Awesome.
Every
That
night.
is awesome,
yeah.
Dude. And what size venues are you talking about?
Oh shit! I mean, in Madrid it was like 3,000. So this is some fucking nerve-wracking shit. So I'm up there, 3,000.
Pass
people
the
are like
microphone around and like have like one of those like really stodgy MCs just walk around in a tuxedo and like give the microphone to the next person.
and people would say like, "Have you ever had a sexually transmitted disease?" Or people would say like, "Is your dad still alive?"
Shit.
Or
like
shit like that.
Me?
Or have you ever had a drug problem? Or are you in love? Or
wow.
What do you think of like Finland, or what, you know what I mean? Like whatever
Q&A,
it is.
Totally unfiltered. That's awesome.
It's totally unfiltered. And it's also, I'm very present. It's real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fucking great, man.
There's nothing canned.
More bands should do shit like that. That's amazing.
Bands are fucking boring, man. It's like, I mean, I love live music so much, but all I want is a real moment. Like I remember seeing like a band where the guitarist fell off stage, and honestly, like it was the only part of the show that was fun, because it was like happened. It was an accident.
Yeah.
It was the only time that I felt like they were vulnerable. You know what I mean? Because then they had to like figure out how to get this player up, and like maybe he was injured and he was kind of embarrassed. Right. You saw real life. You know what I mean? And like that's all you want is a connection with people, And
yeah, I mean, I do think it does occur on so many different levels, but you're absolutely right. I think it is kind of part and parcel with that feeling a connection with the band, and when something can happen that's completely unrehearsed. I mean, let's not make an example out of some guy that like fucking broke his neck, but go ahead.
Yeah.
but it's that impromptu live experience, right? That fuck we need to fucking get back to, but now you got me dwelling on it. But that's interesting that you can pivot your live show to make it even fucking cooler, because if you're only going out with one other person or yourself, you're taking questions and you're doing are you feeling like you're able to create your material in a way that you're satisfied with? I mean, it seems intricate. And
this is the thing, is that sometimes, honestly, some of the shows really, really click, and some of them don't. And but I would rather have that in a way, because it's simply unpredictable. It's not. This isn't like tap dance routine. You know what I mean? I'm going out there, and I'm changing the set list all the time, and like I'm. It's the quality of the connection depends on like the quality of the audience sometimes, you know what I mean? And sometimes it's where my head's at. Sometimes I'm really tired and I'm really burned out, and I'm like, or I'm depressed, or I'm like anxious because some weird shit's happening in the studio, but it's whatever happens, no one's going to say that I'm not present, and no one's going to say it wasn't a real like show, a real moment. You know what I mean? Because I'm there and I'm trying to navigate. And I played a show once I've never canceled a show, right? So I've played like about 1,100 shows. I've never canceled one show. But the downside of that is that sometimes I've played through like really intense, like flus, sicknesses, whatever. Once I had an infection on my hand that was so intense, they had to like cut open my hand and like drain out like all this shit. But I played shows where I could barely like actually play my guitar. So I would switch to keyboards so in other words, the show must go on. I mean, I played a show in New York at the Music Hall of Williamsburg that was probably one of the roughest shows I played in the past year, right before COVID, where I had to change the key signature of the songs because I had lost my voice from being sick. And keep in mind, I never feel guilty about this stuff because I don't drink or do drugs on tour ever. I've never had a drink on tour once, ever. And I like alcohol and I like drugs. So this was a decision I made very early on that I would never, ever drink on tour, even on days off. Never. I've never smoked weed. I've never done drugs. I've watched nothing but good bottles of fucking wine in France go down someone's gullet that wasn't me. But like, you know what I mean? Like I've given a lot of my backstage alcohol away to people, but once in a while you get sick nonetheless. And the reason why I don't drink on tour is that it simply affects your voice. And same with weed. Like weed lowers your immune system. I'm more likely to get a cold if I smoke weed. So it's like I'm very, very superstitious about these things. Yeah. So the show I was so incapable of really singing that like I probably talked for 30 minutes out of the 40-minute set. So, and there might have been people in that audience that was like, this is a fucking shit show. And there was probably other people that were like, this is one of the weirdest, coolest shows. Because I wasn't up there like doing a ham-fisted routine. I was talking to people. You know, I was like really, really engaged and my ex-girlfriend was there, Dana Locke. And she in many ways was the love of my life. And I was like talking to her and I'm not just, it's not a routine to like show like, look, I can cry on stage. It's like, I'm actually just having a conversation like I'm having with you. I'm trying to be as direct and as simple about communicating on stage because, I mean, part of it is that I saw, before I played a show, I started going to shows when I was 15, 16 years old. Mm-hmm. I love fucking bands. I love music. It's my life. Yeah. But there was a point where I would see my heroes and I would realize that my heroes were actually not in the room. They were simply robots. They were so burned out and so disconnected from playing live that they actually wouldn't even really like acknowledge where they were. Or I know they were just saying canned shit. And these are big bands. And then when I started opening up for bands, I was very lucky to start opening up for the Mountain Goats. And Darnielle is the most direct and honest and transparent and least performative person I've ever played. And then I also started opening up for other bands that were huge that would literally say the same shit every night. And I was like, fuck this, man. Like, these are my heroes. And they're not there. They would say fascinating shit backstage. And then they would go on stage and then they would be like, this is a song we wrote for blah, blah. And I'd be like, dude, you can't say this again, man. You cannot repeat yourself. And this is there. And there might be people out there that are like, wait, I'm going to see a band play songs. But for me, I simply was like a drug addict that was no longer getting high off heroin and I needed fentanyl. Like, it wasn't enough for me to see songs. I didn't fucking care anymore because I'd seen so many good shows that I needed connection. Do you know what I mean? And like, I needed to feel that there was something at risk because I don't want to see a band at rehearsal. Like, bands can play their fucking tunes. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen the same band 50 times and like, you want a connection, you know?
Yeah, you want someone to be present in the moment and just kind of be authentic, whether it's of themselves and their personality and who they are as a human, or if it's through the music. Do you think that can be achieved as much through the music as it can be in just those moments that are kind of offbeat, like doing Q&A or talking more to the audience?
Well, this is the problem, I think. I don't know the band Fish at all. I honestly don't know any songs. And once one of my best friends, Jamie Riotto, he bought me a ticket to go see Fish because he was like, listen, this might be embarrassing for you, but you might love, it's like a band that he was, we all have bands that we're like embarrassed of, because we're not sure how to gauge where they land now, and they were huge to us when we were 15 years old, And I have many bands like that. And I'm an anti-snob. I don't give a shit about like a band's place in history or the critical consensus. So I was stoked to see Fish, but he ended up he got really, really sick, and he canceled the show. So I never saw Fish, but I would hear stories of Fish like covering the White Album or covering like these crazy records and then never doing it again, and then playing songs that were a cappella when they're not even like trained singers. And I was like, that's for me. Like, that sounds fucking exciting. That's the riskiness that I'm talking
awesome,
about.
Dude.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Because when you see a band, right, that like is amazing, I know them, especially if I've been on tour with them, I'm like, whoa, they're playing this song that they've probably played like 400 or 500 times. There's no way there's any variation in it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, there just simply isn't. They could probably play a very high quality recording of this song and mime it, and we wouldn't notice,
I would probably tell you that like major Fish fans will tell you there's differences between versions, but it's very esoteric.
But I'm excluding Fish from this in a way, because Fish concerts, as my friend has explained it, they're filled with improvisatory moments and also unscripted, open-ended like musical dialogues between players. And I also know that the keyboard player tours with some fucking crazy real keyboards, which I also have a lot of respect for. So, but I'm really talking about like kind of indie rock bands. Listen, the culture in indie rock is it's pretty vanilla. I've never heard the band The Black Lips, but someone told me a story of seeing them, and like one guy was like peeing in the other guy's mouth, and I was like, that's for me. Like honestly, like I'm like, you know what I mean? Like that, like there's nothing in me that wants to see that other than that's not a scripted moment. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, I have so much respect.
You're a pure punk rocker in
I'm
like an indie
in
overcoat
ways.
with like hip hop and mixed in.
Yes, 100%. And like,
right.
And like, so yeah, I am. Must be some, and I also am an agent of chaos. I want to, but at the end, I love kittens and like herbal tea, and I'm a fucking normie who wants to see. I want to connect with people that I love. That's it.
What's your take on Matt? What's your Matt Berninger take?
I don't know Matt
Berninger. Of the National.
Oh, I did. I opened up for the National 5 times, and they were unbelievably good band. Incredibly
just because
good band.
he'll have these moments. Well, he really loves connecting with the audience. Yeah. And that's a band that, they won't change up their set list incredibly. I mean, they'll do some shows that are pretty extraordinary, and they'll throw in a couple of interesting covers from time to time. But Matt will get up there, and he finds comfort in connecting with humans. That's when he's the most comfortable. We'll jump into the audience, stand up on the front rail with holding everybody's hands and being held up himself, and just be part of the entire thing. Singing with other people, giving the mic to people, singing. I mean, I still think one of the most difficult jobs is probably their sound guy, their front of house sound guy, who's got to like figure out how to turn down the volume at the right moment. So when he hands the mic to somebody else, but he's super fully in the moment with the audience and wants that connection. And it's something that even if you're not that person he's talking to right there, it's everybody else that sees that, and it's infectious. And so.
And it's not about monologues, because I saw Perfume Genius right before COVID, and he didn't talk tons, but he was so fucking charming. He was so absolutely elated to be like in front of that crowd, and so it's not really about like killing the vibe with like a 20-minute story about their alcoholic dad, which is something I would do. You know what I mean? But like,
I don't know if it's killing the vibe. Those are your words, man.
Yeah, it's true.
No, but explain that more. So that I didn't really. Where with Perfume Genius?
Oh yeah. So I saw Perfume Genius at Outside Lands in San Francisco, and he was just like, it's a festival show, so those are tough. You know what I mean? Those are really the shows where you feel like, whoa, this is like karaoke, and like he was just so fun. And he was talking about being there and being in San Francisco and what was happening, and like he was just like kind of goofing and being very vulnerable. It was for me, it was a great show. It was kind of unforgettable for me. I'm
I
a
mean,
huge
festivals
Perfume Seasons
can be a blessing and a curse. I mean, it depends on the band, like you're saying. I mean, because you can get up there with possibly half of the people don't know, even less than half don't know who you are.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And if you're that kind of performer that can just draw everybody in, all of a sudden, boom, instant 7,000 more fans.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So how does so for the bands that come work with you in your studio, how does is it important for you to understand how they play live and how they like to play, like physically in that sense, when they come to you?
I would say it's very important for me not to know that.
Huh.
Because in general, it would be a terrible thing to take into account because it's incredibly limiting. For the worst experiences that I've ever had actually recording bands have been when they're very, very conscious of, like, we need to do this in a way that we can replicate live. That's just the kiss of death. I mean, you should just like lock up the studio and everyone should go home. It's
well, I
never
don't necessarily
work.
mean that way. I mean, is it important for you to know like how they like to, how they like to play live, not so that you can allow them to create something that they could replicate, but is it important for you to know what kind of vibe they like to, that they produce when they're performing in front of an audience?
I think for me, honestly, it's better if the live show history and their future is like disappeared, because like bands need to be constantly and I'm talking career bands. I'm talking bands that are going to make like 5+ records that need to start completely almost being like revolutionary in the way they think about their own music. Because if you're not ahistorical, and the best example is a band like Radiohead, where you have a feeling that they do everything possible to kind of like reinvent themselves every record cycle, which is I can just say this from trying to make a different sounding record. This is what happens. And I'm talking about someone who's like intentionally making every move to make a record that sounds different than the previous one. Mm-hmm. That like you have to start writing different. You have to hire different session musicians. You have to have different instruments. You have to like have different cheat codes. You have to break the systems of composition in your head. You have to change keys. You have to like alter tempos. And then when you like get the record back that you made doing all of these things that have given you nothing but migraines, you've like basically taken this like super tanker crossing the Pacific and made it turn 1 degree, and it sounds so similar to everything else you've made. So keeping that in mind, right? That like it is actually fucking incredible that they went from OK Computer to Kid A. Like it's truly, truly insane. And that Bon Iver went from like the second record to 22 a million. It's truly, truly amazing. And that might have been like acid hack right there. But like, it's really, right. really, really difficult. And this is the thing, is that if you're going to be a careerist, Neil Young, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, David Bowie, The National, anyone, you have to constantly be overturning. I mean, look at the side projects that The National are doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Bryce is doing like symphonic shit. It's like in order to keep a career going, to keep some kind of like aesthetic freshness, you have to be incredibly dismissive about things. And to me, live music is the most corrosive thing that anyone could know about, because it's going to be the dumbed down version. At best, it's going to be all violence and power and this kind of like this really like, I don't know, like unhinged and like temporal playing of the songs that may or may not be able to be reproduced. The best shows I've ever seen have been like bands that have like decided, like once I saw Spoon with this, like they played, and I've seen Spoon a lot, and they added this horn section. Oh, they're incredible. So they added this horn section.
I love Brit so much.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like those are some of the best shows. So but Britt added this horn Britt and Jim and the crew, they added this horn section on like a couple shows, and just that kind of shifting away and having to like change the arrangements and to like I don't know, play within these horns. Or I've seen bands play with like Magic Orchestra before, and like anything like that it can create like an incredibly magic like place. But the part of and I'll kind of try to be more specific about what I mean by this. There's a problem that bands have. If you get a bunch of engineers and producers in a room and you say, what's the worst thing that can happen? They're going to say, a band walks in that has a drummer, a bass player, and 2 guitar players. Like, that's the worst thing that can happen. Do you know what I mean? Because 1, it's square. 2, it's knowable. 3, like, you're not fucking the Stooges. You know what I mean? Like, the history of rock and roll is looming so heavy on you because that setup has been rolling for 60 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
And two guitars, take up an enormous amount of mid-range information, right? And bass and drums, everything's loud. So all of a sudden you're in a fucking club pushing this shitty PA. The singer can barely be heard. So then that means the singing becomes very unsubtle. And that means that there's a war between amplified instruments. And that means that everything's very square, right? It's like very square. You know, and it's almost like a square. 2 guitars, bass, drums. It's impossible. So, like, I remember, I don't know, if I go see a show and I'm looking up and there's like a drummer that has a really weird looking kit that's like wrong, and maybe that drummer has like a monophonic synthesizer on their floor tom, and then there's like a nylon string guitar, and then there's like a viola. I'm like, we're in business. You know what I mean? Like,
now we're talking.
They might, and I'm not just like everything but the kid. I don't just listen to wacky music. You know, like for me, like listening to Frank Zappa, it's like that seems like hell for me. You know what I mean? Like so it's like I'm not looking for like the wacky thing here, but what I'm looking for is unbalanced and where people are having to like kind of create their own rules, their own systems, right? So like, I mean, I saw this band last year called the Cutie Band, and they're playing at the Bootleg Theater in L.A. It's 2 blocks away from where I live, so I go there all the time. I walk in, and they're setting up, and they're 4 players. They have 4 vocal mics, 1 floor tom, 1 kind of table of like janky ass percussion, 1 acoustic guitar, and then another singer with percussion. And I was like, I'm sorry, but they're going to be great. Like I fucking knew it. Like I knew that they were going to be great. It's like there's no way that they're not going to be forced to do something way more interesting because simply they only had 1 harmonic instrument. No low end came from any. They were generating nothing below fucking 200 cycles. You know what I mean? Like it was so weird, and 4 singers. Yeah. And it was one of the best shows I saw in 2019 Yeah, it was 2019. It was. See, I'm thinking about 2020 as a lost year. It's just gone.
No, it's just gone. No one's even. It's not even in the vocabulary anymore. Well, that's so interesting because you were saying how you started out by saying live performance is something that it was almost like it's so dumbed down because it's got to be this huge emotional broadcast of something that can be accessible to the lowest common denominator almost. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to summarize.
I wouldn't say lowest common denominator.
Yeah,
and I'll let you continue.
Neither would I.
I know, because I do believe actually that audiences for indie rock shows, of which I've been a part of, like feels like 2,000 of them, if you add up ones I've played and ones I've been at, or these are magical groups of people. Like, and I think that they're in general very, very educated music consumers, and often intimidating to me. Like, I don't walk into a show being like, I'm going to blow someone's mind. I'm like, fuck, I got to play well. But continue, and I'll answer.
Yeah. I sort of forgot what I was. I mean, just that it needs to be a directed and projected live performance with a purpose that you were talking about. Oh, you're sort of making an argument against the uniqueness of live performance from an instrumental and a melodic standpoint almost, which would kind of make the counter argument that recording in a studio is something that's more essential than a live performance. But
Yeah.
I would argue, not necessarily arguing any counter to that. I would tend to agree with that in a very technical and with certain parameters that, this is the live performance, this is studio work. But live performance is totally essential to the human experience.
Yes, 100%. I would say that the contaminating factor with live performance is, and it was necessary, and I don't think it was an accident, but live, like rock, indie rock, country, all that stuff, it's the bass line was playing in a bar, right? And it still is.
Yeah.
And the bass line is playing in a bar where you're competing against, like, not only are you like given these like weapons, amplified instruments, you're given a kind of like a percentage of people that are there not necessarily to see music, or you're up against sometimes just purely noise by staff. Like, I mean, I've played bars where it's like,
and all kinds of shit.
Or hurling recycled beer bottles in like the most violent way into like, and so there's this part of like, it's like a war. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a noise war that so it's interesting.
Go ahead.
So I've seen a lot of bands start out to having this like delicate conversation. Maybe they start playing in like more like, like Sufjan Stevens in his early shows, or like Mount Erie, the microphones where you're playing at like art galleries, kind of like really cool, no alcohol, like co-ops, art galleries, libraries, stuff like that. Places that I actually play at now. I never play in bars, like unless I'm opening, I'm not big enough to play in a bar. So what happens is that you take that into bars, you dumb down, and then you start playing bigger places and festivals, and then everything, you have lighting cues, you have all these things that are just like you're on a road. You're no longer just like in a fucking dune buggy going through the desert.
You're on the highway.
Like in traffic, you know what I mean? And like, so it's not that people are just like, I like loud rock guitars. It's like they're like, I can't stand so many people talking where it's like it's louder than what the noise we're making on stage.
Yeah, it's fucked up. I mean, who said it once? Like, no, I mean, come on. There was the folk revolution, and then Dylan plugged in, and then they were like, once you put a drum set into the equation, the guitars have to be amplified, and then everyone was off to the races on rock and roll, right? And Pete Seeger back there trying to take an axe and hack at the electronic cables backstage at Newport Folk in 1966, right?
And could you imagine how quiet that would sound now to us? Which is really funny if you think about it.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's about the songs, though.
Yeah,
it is about the songs at the end of the day.
Yeah,
in my IMO.
Yes, 100%. But
I mean, because that's what's going to cut through the noise and the distortion and everything else that is part of that live experience for very valid reasons, right? I mean, there is a communal kind of tribal experience of the noise, of the thump, of the kick drum, of the bass, and everything. But I would argue if you're not putting it together in a cohesive fashion that creates a song.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
That's kind of what, then the clinking of the glasses and the recycled, then it doesn't fucking matter because it's a fucking great song.
But one interesting thing, though, is that, like, David Byrne has this thing where the venues kind of changed actually what music is being written. And so think about this. Think about that you go from these, like, coffee house, like, art galleries, and then you start playing bars. So this is really what, I did for 10, 15 years was I basically played bars everywhere. Europe, here, Australia, Japan. And then if I was opening up for someone, it would be in like theaters. So when I was playing bars, it's interesting because like it would be very common that if you played a bar that you're playing on a stage where there's just like 3 or 4 massive subs, right? And the crossover is set so high that like if someone just hits a kick drum, it literally sounds Like it's the it's the bassiest,
Thunderous.
loudest thing you've ever heard. And so unless you're bringing your own sound person, which is incredibly expensive, you are being warped in a way. No matter what your intention is, you're being warped in a way and amplified in a way that really has nothing to do with what's happening on stage. Do you know what I mean? So you might be playing this relatively, it might sound like Leonard Cohen up there, but like in front of house, like you have like, the kick drum is like been boosted by like 40 dB. Do you know what I mean? So it's
you're drilling
crazy.
down you're drilling down understandably into this other area of sound and technique and of projecting sound in an outdoor or indoor environment that's completely and totally relevant. I get it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that changes the way bands come back to make their next record. So I guess just to end this whole storyline, that like this is why I don't want to have any connection to bands' live music at all. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, don't ask, don't tell. I don't even care if you play live. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to listen to these songs and I want to make a high art record, and that's it.
Well, absolutely. I love that. And, but you did hit on something interesting, was the evolution of going from venue, like the evolutionary climb of an artist from a smaller kind of venue to, major venues where there's some things that are not in their own control from a sound and sonic perspective. But talk to me a little bit about how you feel about playing in super unique venues, like the Botanical Garden Pine Grove at UC Berkeley campus, for example, or places that are like that, where you really can have that quiet, unique, and purely musical experience, or can you?
You can. Well, I guess this would be the moment to tell you how I tour now. So I strictly tour with this if I'm not opening up for a band. So I'm on the books. I have another European tour in September. So hopefully Europe will get they're way behind in vaccination. So if they get it together, that tour will happen. That will be all in theaters. So that I look forward to that. That to me is like a great tour. But if I'm touring alone in the States, the only way I'm profitable is if I'm touring in the house show circuit. And that's specifically through this company called Undertow, which is based in Champaign. And they have this like unique model that was really kind of invented by them and Pedro the Lion, where you have like pre-sale tickets only. You have hosts that like kind of put together the show, and you start the shows at 8. You have no amplification. You have no opener. And often the hosts will like, bake cupcakes or make like margaritas. Like, it's kind of fun. You know what I mean?
So like it can be like private residences.
It's private residences. But the interesting thing is that I soon figured out when I started doing this, which was like 3 years ago, and it totally changed my life, that most of the places you play are not homes, but they are like I've played a hair salon. I've played so many art galleries that I couldn't even count them. I've played so many recording studios. I've played in the backyard of an auto shop. I've played in a garden. I played in someone's backyard where it was like they had they were doing like real egg production. So there were like dozens of chickens in coops and stuff. And like, so you could hear, so it was part of the show.
Is that worse or better than people throwing bottles in
so much
in the
better.
garbage?
Anything is better than playing in a bar. I'm just telling you.
So that's interesting though.
Yeah. And so I played like, I've played it like art spaces, cafes, like it just goes on and on and on. So those venues, they're part of the show. Do you know what I mean? Like when you play those they all have their own acoustic footprint. They all have their own way of arranging the audience close to you or far from you. And like some of those shows, the spaces fight against you and what you're doing. And sometimes it makes it the most magical thing you've ever seen. And so my connection to like unusual spaces is complete. I mean, this is how I make my money now. This is how I live, is playing really a random array of like curated. I mean, Undertow's really good at curating these places, you know. So, but they're always different, and you don't know what you're going to, you know, I just drive up. I don't look it up. I just drive up to an address, and I'm like, whoa, this is like.
No, seriously? You just,
this.
like, they give you a list. This is how it works. They give you a list of addresses, and you just show up. They would tell you what it is, but do you ask, like, for them not to tell you? Like, I'm just curious. Like,
they don't even actually
speaking.
tell me. They just send me an address. They send me a tour book, and I don't even ask. I just like, and I just like
awesome.
do the mileage the day before, and I'm just like, and I don't look at what it is. I just drive there, and I pull out my acoustic guitar and my merch, and I'm basically, I'm there to sell vinyl. You know, so I do sell a lot of vinyl at these shows. That's really, I'm kind of like a traveling store, you know. And I'm also there to, I play 2-hour shows solo.
Wow.
I take questions in real time, and I take requests. I probably bring 90 songs with me, so I can play a lot of different shit.
Wow. And you love that? So you like doing that kind of stuff?
It's the most fun thing you could ever have.
Really?
Like I booked a tour that was like 3 weeks in the Southeast. So I just played like Florida and Georgia and Louisiana. I went swimming every day. It's like you can completely target what you do and like why you do it, you know, and then you can book days off specifically where you want to hang out with people, you know.
Wow.
So it's like, it's amazing, you know, and like I'll never be able to go back. But also I'm saying that from a position where I'm not big enough that I'm not turning down bar tours. I'm not big enough to do those. It wouldn't be profitable for me to do that. And many bands you kind of drop out of that world because it's simply so expensive when you pay for, you know, a van and a tour manager and session players, or you're divvying up your take with 4 people, 5 people. No way. There's no way.
Yeah. Right,
you have to be huge to make it. You can delude yourself to like run. You know, you can do fake math to be like, oh, we came home with $1,000, and it's like, did you? There's a lot of costs before a tour. You know.
Yeah. But from a purity of your music standpoint, do you feel that you'd rather do a tour like that, or would you rather play, 1,000-seat halls, for example?
Well, from a purity of life standpoint, I'd rather be like mega famous and like play like, I'd rather be like, I saw Bon Iver play at the Forum and he sold 12,000 tickets, and it was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. It was one of the best sounding.
Then that can happen. It
can happen. Oh, I would much rather be rich and famous and powerful and everything, you know what I mean? But we have what we have, you know, and like I'm very
we were making an aesthetic argument, and I spoke to you on an aesthetic basis of playing unique places and how where does that kind of fit in your whole aesthetic and technical view. But of course, like, you know, we'd all rather play in like 15, you know, sell out the LA Forum every night.
Fuck yeah. Let's say that there's like, I don't have an ego because I have a brain injury. And let's say that like you get X amount of money regardless of whether you play the Forum or like someone's backyard solo. Probably the way that I would love to tour is I would love to bring, and I think about this all the time, I'd love to bring 2 musicians with me who both sing and who are both multi-instrumentalists and who have like very strange kind of like instruments with them. Like, so maybe like a very kind of like abbreviated drum set or some kind of like percussion drum battery thing. And then a couple keyboards, and then maybe I'm playing a keyboard and acoustic guitar, and we bring our own small modular PA, and that we have a sound person that's controlling everything, and that we can do those shows and drop them into these art spaces. That, to me, I think about that all the time. That is what I would do if I could just push a button. You know, like in other words, you have the intimacy, but you also have the flexibility of playing with 2. I think a trio is just like phenomenally flexible, and with 3 singers.
Have you, in your career, have you done recording of live performances?
I did. I recorded a show that I did at the Independent in San Francisco and then put it up on my website. And we really I hired someone specifically to record the show as a live show. And I look back on stuff like that, and it just feels like it's barely interesting for me. You know what I mean? Like I've never really liked. I mean, I grew up listening to like Frampton Comes Alive, and like
Yeah, of
so
course, man.
I guess it
You
can be done.
You grew up
and like
listening to classic rock, just like me.
yeah, and like Song Remains the Same, and then I found out that those were all like overdubbed after the fact, which I thought was like fascinating, you know. But like,
Were you obsessed with Song Remains the Same when you were a kid?
the live version of No Quarter changed my life. I mean, that's like the like really like that's the main thing that got me into music was that song. The live
I literally
version
think
of
in
No Quarter.
10th grade I can't exactly remember, but I think I saw Song Remains the Same at least 3 to 4 dozen times, midnight shows.
I believe it. I believe it.
was like-
It's a huge thing. Yeah.
And it was this really cool old movie theater, and they actually had like surround sound at the time, and it was blasting. What I thought was blasting
Sick.
loud.
It was. I'm sure it was blasting. Actually.
I guess I can't. I was obsessed
all that
with
devil
Zeppelin.
shit, all occult stuff. I mean, it just felt like the most forbidden thing I've ever seen in my life. You know? It was amazing. But
yeah, go ahead.
I'm a studio person. Like in the end, like if like I'm on Radiohead's like email list because I'm like a super fan. If they send out an email saying, "Oh, we just posted this live show," I'd be like, "So what?" But if Tom York said I just put out this like C-side from this record, I would download it immediately. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, is that because you don't necessarily like the way they play live? Because that can happen.
No,
also.
I've seen them, so I think they're unbelievably live. I just think that
Right.
there's something about it's like you're mixing up things. It's like you know what I mean? It's like someone saying, "Hey, come over to my house. I'm going to make you dinner, and I'm going to do this like speed cooking thing where I'm going to cook you and serve you dinner in 8 minutes." And you'd be like, "Why are you combining two weird things together?" Do you know what I mean? Like what is so interesting about that? Like what's cool about a live show is that you're in front of these like speakers. You know, like I saw Tom York and Nigel Godrich like at Hollywood Bowl, and I think that was in December of 2019 or January of 2020, and it was a very good sounding show. I mean, I know just from like reading about what they do that they bring like crazy outboard gear, and they bring like engineers to actually mix them, and they have like, you know, one of their like studio assistants is doing live dubbing, and like they're all in. But
Right.
But there's something about I know this from trying to do it, but that when you try to record that, it doesn't work. There's something about it. It's so inefficient to try to capture that and make the fidelity translate. It's just I've never really heard a live record that was was interesting to me. Like I know it's out there. I just haven't heard it. You know.
Right. That's so cool. But before I let you go, we definitely have to talk about Diamond Dogs because that's like one of my favorite albums and arguably one of Bowie's best albums. If you aren't
100%.
obligated to say that Ziggy Stardust is his best album, I don't know. I've always loved the production of Diamond Dogs itself. I've never even been able to get my brain wrapped around exactly what he's doing on that album, and that kind of I feel like it's like this suction almost. It sucked everything out except this beautiful vibe of music. I don't know. It just it has a feel to it, right? Yeah. So I'm just curious, why did you decide to cover that entire album, and did you play that one live?
So we only did that show live once, actually. We did it at a movie theater in San Francisco, where we were asked to curate a movie and then play a set. So I did The Science of Sleep, the Michel Gondry movie, and then we played Diamond Dogs live only one time. And I mean, there's probably 30 people there. And it was a good show too, actually. And so the reason why I decided on Diamond Dogs feels like the most Bowie of all the records that he's made. It's the only guitar that he played. I mean, the only record that he played all the guitar on. And it's really the record where you feel his stamp as a singer, performer, producer, you know, like actively involved participant. And it was peak cocaine for him, speed, cocaine, whatever his accelerant of choice was. You know, he at that time, 1974, 1973, Mick Jagger was like saying, "I'm worried for you." And Mick Jagger was like going fucking hard, man. Like if you have like a drug addict who's worried about you, you're in trouble,
Right.
And
right.
he wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating, he had like a really weird diet. He had like really paranoid shit going on, and like so that record is unfinished to me in a weird. It feels like broken and unfinished in all of the good ways. And the peak moments of that record are, they're some of the most exciting parts of his discography, which says a lot, And
it really is.
And I think it's interesting too that he started like doing like this 1984 concept record, and then he was kind of like threatened with a lawsuit to stop doing that. So the record has this like broken feel where it was a concept record that was abandoned. It's very personal on some levels, and like I think his singing is uniquely weird on it, and he's doing like, it's kind of the height of like that cut and paste lyric thing he was doing. And by the way, I gave that record, and speaking of like people not having respect, I hate cover records. I really don't like them. I hate when someone does a cover song, or like when there's like a guest musician on something. It just doesn't work because people defer too much to power, right? So one of the things I did with this record was I got musicians who ended up being incredibly important to me after this, but Jason Sleater, Rob Shelton, Jamie Riotto, who I knew, one, they do not care about David Bowie. They don't dislike David Bowie. They don't care about David Bowie. They listen to like Mingus and fucking Miles. They don't care about Bowie. They didn't know the record. Like, I think that they said that they knew the song Rebel, Rebel, and that was it. So I gave them the record, and I gave them the chords, and they were like, no, we're not going to listen to the record. We're going to do a really weird version of this. You're just going to play us the songs a couple times, and then we're going to make our own fucking chord chart, because they're all weird jazzers. They're all out players, and they're like so good that they can just hear like a chord pattern, and they're like, yeah, we get it. We understand what's happening. And they're not dismissive. They're not snobby at all. And so that's the sound of that record, was like a Bowie lifer who's fronting a band of like very smart out musicians who have no respect for the material in the best way. So that record was done in 3 days.
No kidding.
And it was hard. It was really difficult. But I like that record a lot because it feels like it doesn't defer to like Bowie as an artist. It's just like a weird, very weird, imagist, surrealist version of that record.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, it's kind of ingrained into my whole psyche as Diamond Dog. So even if you weren't being completely referential to the album, I mean, it was there for sure. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Yep, that's cool.
And it's great stuff, man. It's great stuff. And I heard you talk about the Cedars recently. What's your most recent status on your obsession with that place?
Oh God, yeah. So
because now I'd not heard of it, and then I was looking it up. Which for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, that's you're like 2 albums ago, and it's an amazing album, but it's named after this land reserve up in north of Sonoma, or in Sonoma County.
Yeah, in Sonoma County, yeah.
Yeah, wow. I have to go visit this place. What's your obsession with this place in a good way?
So it's like an 11 by 11 roughly area of northern western Sonoma County. To picture, Douglas fir, old growth redwoods, bay laurel, madrone, tan oak, coastal oaks. Like, it's fucking beautiful. And it's very low density out there. So there's like, there's 1,000, 2,000 acre parcels strung together. And it's a lot of weed, a lot of wine. It's a really good food. It's kind of like I would say the most underrated county in California. And I co-own some land within a collective in West Sonoma, and maybe 5 miles north of that land is the Cedars. And the Cedars is interesting because it's a geological anomaly where there's like this kind of like, I don't know, lower layer. I mean, I'm not a geologist, but like this like kind of lower layer of like strata or whatever that's been pushed up through either earthquakes or some like accident. And so you have this exposed, I don't know, it looks like molten like lava or crust of the earth. And the soil is incredibly base. So what that means is that it has created plants that are endemic only to the cedars. So there's like, for instance, a cypress tree that only grows there. There are 2 orchids that only grow there. And there's tons. I think there's 11 endemic species in the cedars. And there's like hot springs and like really weird like lime kind of like calcified deposits that come out of the ground that look like wedding cakes. They're really tall. Right. And so they're trying to turn it into a national park, and no one has really access to it because it's like landlocked, and they're all private owners. And we've tried to hike there twice. We get turned away by private landowners, and these are like, they got shotguns. It's not, you're not really allowed to do that. So we stopped doing that. We tried many times to like learn who owned the land. We looking through public records or Onyx, the app, the hunting app, and I've never been there, and I can see it from the land. So, and I'm okay with not seeing it because there's something magic about this. It's like this perfect,
just knowing
pure,
it's there.
Yeah, this like pure creative space that you actually can't get to, which is like what, I've said before is like, that's what you do when you're writing a song. You're trying to find this like magical creative perfection ideal that you never ever get to, but it keeps you going.
It's out there on the horizon. It's the oasis. It's
you can
where
see it.
You just can't. Yeah. Well, it's like with anything in life. I mean, you have to have goals, really, and there's like there's things that you're looking to achieve. You're like, well, what is that? I'm like, it's obviously almost exclusively in the creative world. You're like, I don't know, but when I get there, I'll know it. Or what are you looking for? I mean, I don't know. I just have to just keep doing this.
Yep.
And it's in the doing. It's not actually in the arriving, right?
Yes, 100%.
Are we getting too like Easternly philosophical here?
No, we're great. We're the best.
Well, dude, you are so fascinating, John Vanderslice. Thanks so much, man, for
that was great.
For hanging with me. It was a pleasure talking to you about all this kind of stuff. And
hell yeah.
And when I say all this kind of stuff, I mean your music world and your little slice of the music industry and world. And man, I hope we get back to everything. And I'm so sorry that like the studio shit's not really happening for you right now. Yeah.
We'll be back. And this whole thing will be back. This is an unwanted journey, but we're on it. So here we are. So
nothing you can do. It's a train that we're all. Yeah, I think there's some silver linings, but in the meantime, I'm psyched to hear that you've got some new stuff coming out too. So that'll be cool. What did you say? I think I got it down here. EP in April and LP
and a record in August. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. That'll be great, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you on tour. So I want to talk to these guys in Champaign, the Undertow.
Oh yeah, Undertow. They're incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So
email me. I'll put you in the loop with them.
Yeah, right on. Are you gonna tour around and do some of this new material, or what do you think? What's your thinking right now?
The second I'm allowed to, I'm out of the house. The second I can do it, and it's right safe for people, and I really don't want to be in a backyard with limited capacity looking at people in masks. So I'm going to do what
you might be looking at pieces, and there's going to be people in masks. So I don't like it either, but I'm like trying to get my brain wrapped around that.
I know. I think September,
but it's better than
October,
getting sick, man.
Yeah, but people are going to be vaccinated. It's insane at some point. If you have Pfizer or Moderna running through your bloodstream, there is no way you should be in a mask. They just bought 300 million more Pfizer. And Modernas.
I saw that.
And
which
those
is only 150. That's still only 150 million people getting vaccinated, right?
Yeah, but we have 10% already vaccinated.
Yeah, that's
in
true.
The US.
Okay, so
that's
fine.
huge.
So 10%. But yeah, we'll take 30.
You've got
35 million.
AstraZeneca, which doesn't cover the Brazilian variant, but it's still, and you've got Johnson & Johnson coming. You're going to have people that have multiple vaccines in their bloodstreams, which is fucking. I'd take all of them if I could, honestly.
Yeah, right. Let's make a cocktail.
Seriously, I would honestly take a fucking cocktail and get this shit over with.
You'd take a cocktail of all kinds of shit, man.
Actually, I'm pretty careful about drugs. I test this MDMA. I bought it from the dark web, and I tested it with reagent, and it's 100% MDMA. I would never take street drugs.
I know nothing about this shit, but like, what do you mean you tested it with reagent?
you buy reagent. It's a chemical, like you can chemically like test MDMA, and by the color variant, you can see.
Oh, know that what you're getting is what you think.
Yeah, that it's 100% MDMA without any meth or any other cutting agents. And that's what you want. You want the drug that you're taking.
And is that like for creative purposes or just fun purposes?
It's for fun purposes, but it's also for life purposes. It keeps you alive. It's like MDMA is one of the most joyful things you could ever do. It's amazing. It's therapeutic. Right. But I'm also I like drugs. I'm not going to wrap it in like language of like medicine and shit.
That's not a fucking secret. I mean, I knew that going in, but whatever.
Yeah, I'm pretty obvious about it. All right, my friend. You're the best. I'm sending you this right now.
Much,
so just
Sean.
Email me if you have trouble with this.
Yeah, and make sure you mention me to Tabor tonight, man.
Oh, I will. Hell yeah. I'm going to see him in 4 hours.
Yeah, right on. That's so cool.
Peace.
All right, peace out, man.
You're the best.
I really appreciate
I'm sending
it.
this to you right now.
Right on.
All right.
Take care, John.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, that was John Vanderslice on Roadcase. Man, I love that guy. I loved that conversation so much. We went in so many different directions, and he's such a varied and interesting human, both from a musical and a personal perspective. I mean, he says like he's a normie for all his varying and different views on music and life and drugs, as you heard, etc. He's just looking for a personal connection and loves live music for that. Really loves the unique performance aspect of live music, and truly believes in the art of musical expression, and that's really obvious both in his own albums and in the albums that he produces, which are quite varied. The depth and breadth of what he's done is really astounding and very impressive, and I love him for that. But he also expresses a frustration with live music from a sonic standpoint. That's understandable. He's played everywhere from art galleries to bars to opening for other acts in venues and theaters, and even now goes out and works with a company that places him in different types of and varieties of venues, including beauty salons and people's living rooms and backyards, etc., that he really loves. But he really likes to control the sound and control the environment, and the louder it gets for him, the kind of more out of control sonically it gets as well. But he's got such an interesting way of articulating his point of view. I really love the way that John communicates, and it was just a really interesting conversation, and I hope that you really all enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this episode, if you could follow us on socials, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel, and of course you can visit us at Patreon to support this podcast, patreon.com/roadcasepod. But if you really feel so compelled and are listening to this on your favorite listening platform, if you could rate and review Roadcase, that would be awesome. Thanks again for joining us for this episode. I want to thank John Vanderslice once again so much for being here. Really enjoyed chatting with him, and I look forward to catching up with him. Don't forget that he's got an EP coming out in April, and he's got a new LP coming out in August. So I'm really excited to hear those and to hear what he's got in store for everybody. Thanks again to John for being here. And thanks again for listening to this episode of Roadcase. Thanks again so much for listening. And I'd like to encourage everyone to get involved with Roadcase. You can do so in a number of different ways. You can email me at info@roadcasepod.com with questions, comments, and even suggestions for guests. Or you can follow us on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We're at RoadcasePod. And we have a YouTube channel called Roadcase Podcast. And if you are able to and like to support Roadcase, we have a Patreon site at patreon.com/roadcasepod. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And if you could please rate and review the podcast while you're there, that would be great. So I want to thank Walzer for this awesome theme music that we have. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to Roadcase. We have a lot of great episodes coming up, so I'll see you on down the road.